I remember the exact moment my world collapsed. It was Christmas morning, and my own son drove me toward a place where people go to be forgotten. He thought I didn't notice.
He thought I didn't understand.
But I heard everything. The whispers, the lies, the plans they made behind my back. And when my daughter-in-law looked at me in the rearview mirror, smiling as if she were doing me a favor, something inside me broke and awakened. Because that Christmas, they didn't just try to steal my home. They tried to erase me. But they never expected what happened next. They never imagined that the fragile old woman they underestimated was the one who would destroy their entire plan. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who stays silent long enough to learn the truth. I've always counted down the days until Christmas, like crossing off little pieces of hope on a calendar. The house used to smell of cinnamon, the decorations carried memories, and that red tablecloth seemed to come alive every December. But that year, there was a strange silence hanging in the air. My son spoke less. My daughter-in-law's words came clipped and measured, as if she weighed every syllable. And me, I've always been good at sensing things before they're said. The warmth was gone, long before the lights began to twinkle. I woke early one morning to fetch the old box of ornaments. It felt heavier than usual, not in weight, but in meaning. I placed the porcelain angel on the sideboard and, for a brief second, heard my late husband's voice. "Don't forget the star, love." The star was there, but it didn't shine the same. Funny how, sometimes, what disappears isn't what we see, but what we feel. The tenderness, the invitation, the embrace that used to arrive without being asked for. I tried bringing up the dinner plans with my son. "So, who's bringing what this year?" He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes glued to his phone, mumbling that they were still sorting out the details. Details? In a family like ours, details are about who brings dessert, not whether the mother is invited or not. A sharp sting hit my chest, not pain but neglect. Since when did I become a detail in the story I helped build? In the kitchen, stirring coffee, the scent carried me back to a Christmas long gone. My mother bustling around, my father tuning the radio, trying to catch the choir songs. The table was small, but the joy was immense. I thought about how hard I'd fought to keep that spirit alive. Then I froze mid-stir. No one had asked about my famous codfish dish. No one mentioned Secret Santa. What exactly were they planning without me? The day crawled by like a rerun of a show I used to love. My daughter-in-law rushed in, perfume too strong, smile too wide. "We'll talk later, okay?" she said, kissing the air near my cheek. The door slammed shut, leaving a trail of cold wind. I sat in my husband's chair, the one that still sinks in the same spot, and felt deep down that something had already been decided. Not by me, about me. That night, when the clock struck 9, I pulled out my box of old photos. There, no one could leave me out. We laughed in silence, me, my wrinkled fingers, and my memories. I saw my little boy wearing a crooked Santa hat, his face smeared with pudding. I saw my daughter-in-law on her first Christmas here, promising, "Family is everything." I swallowed hard. Promises age too, don't they? Some rot before their time. The next morning, I gathered the courage to walk to their house. Two possibilities circled in my mind. Either I was imagining things, or something was terribly wrong. I rang the bell, and she opened the door with that smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Oh, hi Mom, now's not really a good time." Not a good time? For the woman who raised your husband? Who held this family together when it almost fell apart? I said nothing. Years have taught me that when a door won't open, it's usually because someone's pushing from the other side. Back home, I made a list, not of groceries, but of absences. No group messages, no requests for my dishes, no "you'll come, right?" I also listed presences, the heaviness in my chest, the fog in my eyes from pretending not to notice, the quiet courage building inside me. Sometimes, writing down your pain is how you stop it from swallowing you whole. I decorated anyway. Hung the wreath on the door, the little bells on the window, their metallic rings stubbornly defiant. "If I have to spend Christmas alone," I whispered, "then it'll be on my own terms." But hearts aren't built to celebrate alone, are they? They throb, they ache, they question. What did I do to deserve being left out? Or worse, what are they planning to do with me? I reached for my phone to call my son, but before I could press his name, a message popped up, 3 short, cold lines. Something about getting everything ready and avoiding any issues before the 24th. No name was mentioned, but I knew. I didn't need to see it written to understand that Christmas wasn't about dinner anymore. It was about control, about getting rid of me somehow. It started with a silence that felt too deliberate, too polite to be innocent. You know, that kind of quiet that hums behind a closed door, when people lower their voices just enough for you to almost not hear. That's how it began. I used to be the one who organized everything, the shopping, the menu, even the color of the napkins. But this year, no one asked for my opinion. No one called. The house felt smaller, as if the walls themselves knew I was being left out of something. One morning, I was watering my plants when I overheard my neighbor chatting with someone on the phone. Oh yes, they rented the cabin early this year. Said it'll be a big family Christmas. My heart stopped. Cabin? My son and his wife always celebrated here. Always. I stood there, hose still running, the water spilling over my shoes as a cold realization crept up my spine. They had made plans, and I wasn't part of them. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Denial is a gentle liar. It lets you breathe while it slowly tightens the rope. I baked a batch of cookies and went over to their house, pretending it was a spontaneous visit. My daughter-in-law opened the door, her smile thin as paper. Oh, what a surprise. We were just heading out. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of suitcases by the door. Something inside me cracked, quietly. Heading out where? I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual. She hesitated, eyes darting to my son, who appeared behind her, guilt written all over his face. Just errands, Mom. Nothing big. Nothing big? The suitcases were zipped, the car keys already in her hand. It's funny how people think you stop noticing once you get older, as if wisdom doesn't sharpen with time. That night, I sat by the window and watched their porch light flicker on and off. I remembered all the times I'd stayed up waiting for them to come home for Christmas Eve, just to see the look on my son's face when he saw the tree lit up. I used to tell him, no matter where life takes you, this will always be your home. And now that home was too quiet. The kind of quiet that screams something's wrong. The next morning I called my son. He answered on speaker, his voice distant. Mom, I've been meaning to tell you. My heart raced. I gripped the phone tighter. We're doing something a little different this year, he said. Just for a change.
Just for a change.
Such innocent words, but they sliced right through me. I forced a smile into my tone, though tears burned at the corners of my eyes. Of course, dear. Change is good. But my hands were trembling. After the call, I sat staring at the wall for a long time. The old clock ticked loudly, as if mocking me for waiting. I thought of my husband, how he would have handled this. He was always the bridge between us. Since he passed, I've been the inconvenient reminder of a life too real, too old-fashioned for them. Maybe that's why they preferred the cabin. No memories there, no ghosts of the past watching. Later that week, a Christmas card arrived. It wasn't handwritten, it was printed. Wishing you joy and peace this holiday season. No signatures, no love. Michael and Sarah.
Just that.
I held it between my fingers, feeling the space where warmth should have been. Even the glitter looked cheap. That was the moment I knew they hadn't just forgotten to invite me. They had deliberately excluded me. I went to bed early that night, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed every conversation, every smile that didn't reach the eyes, every excuse. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. And while they prepared their perfect Christmas away from me, I was left here, wrapping gifts for people who no longer saw me as part of their family. Still, something deep inside me refused to break. Maybe it was pride, maybe instinct, or maybe the quiet voice of my late husband whispering, "Don't let them erase you." I turned off the lamp, my heart heavy but alert. If they thought they could write me out of the story, they were wrong. This Christmas, I would find out exactly what they were hiding. I used to know my son better than anyone. I could tell what he felt by the way he sighed, or how long he stared at the floor before speaking. But lately, he had become a stranger in his own tone. Every time I called, his words came out flat, polite, rehearsed, as if someone were standing beside him listening. "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's fine." That phrase became his shield, and every time he said it, I felt him drift farther away. It's strange how silence can speak louder than anger. When he was younger, even our arguments had love in them, raised voices, yes, but always followed by laughter or apology. Now there was only emptiness, a kind of cold distance that made me wonder if he still remembered who I was beneath the title of mother. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the phone, hoping it would ring, just to hear that familiar warmth again. One afternoon, I decided to visit. I baked his favorite pie, apple with extra cinnamon, just like he used to beg for when he was a boy. When he opened the door, he looked startled, almost uneasy. "Mom, you should have called first," he said, stepping aside. I smiled, pretending not to notice the tension in his jaw. "I wanted to surprise you," I replied softly. But surprises only work when people want to see you. The house felt different, colder, even though the fireplace was on. My daughter-in-law sat on the couch, phone in hand, barely looking up. "Oh, hi," she said, as if I were a distant relative, not the woman who helped raise her husband. I placed the pie on the counter and waited for my son to speak, to say something that sounded like the boy I once knew. But he just cleared his throat and said, "We're really busy this week." That's when I realized the worst kind of silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of fear. He looked at me like someone who wanted to tell me something but couldn't, like a man trapped between loyalty and guilt. "Everything okay, dear?" I asked. He nodded too quickly, eyes darting away. "Of course. Don't worry about anything." But I did worry, because mothers can tell when their sons are lying, even if the lie is meant to protect them. I tried to hold his hand before leaving, but he pulled away gently, glancing toward his wife, as if seeking approval. That small gesture broke something inside me. Not because he withdrew his hand, but because I saw how easily he surrendered his will. Once I was his anchor. Now I was a memory he didn't want to revisit. On the walk home, I replayed the visit in my head. Every glance, every pause, every word left unsaid. The evening air bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold I felt inside. I realized that the woman he married had somehow become the gatekeeper between us, deciding when I could see him, what I should know, and perhaps what he should hide. Later that night, I sat in my husband's chair, listening to the creak of the wood beneath me. "He's slipping away from me," I whispered to the empty room. A gust of wind rattled the window, as if answering back. Maybe I had been too patient. Maybe love, when too quiet, turns into permission for others to rewrite your place in their lives.
I didn't sleep that night.
My son's silence echoed in my mind, repeating like a broken lullaby. It wasn't just distance, it was warning. Something was brewing beneath that calm surface, something neither of them wanted me to find out. And though I didn't know it yet, the truth would soon knock on my door in the most unexpected way. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those gray, sleepy days when even the clock seems tired. I was folding laundry when my phone began to buzz on the table. The name flashing on the screen was my son's, and for a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe he missed me after all. But when I answered, no one spoke. I could hear voices, faint but distinct, as if the call had been made by mistake. At first, I thought it was background noise. Then I recognized her voice, my daughter-in-law's. Sharp, quick, restless. "We have to handle this before Christmas," she said. My hands froze mid-fold. "Handle what?" Another voice, my son's, responded quietly, his tone uncertain. "I just don't think it's right." There was a pause, then her words came back like knives wrapped in honey. "Do you want her ruining everything again? We can't keep pretending she's fine." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rest. They spoke about me as if I were a problem to be solved. The social worker said she just needs evaluation, my daughter-in-law added. "Once that's done, It'll be easier to manage her affairs. Evaluation? Affairs? My stomach turned. Were they talking about my health or my home? For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, the laundry falling from my hands, my breath shallow. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then, but something told me to stay silent. Sometimes, silence is the only weapon left when love becomes betrayal. I ended the call, my fingers trembling, and sank into the nearest chair. Everything around me felt unreal. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own heartbeat. I replayed the words again and again, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood. But no, the tone, the precision, the calm cruelty, it was all too clear. My daughter-in-law wasn't just planning Christmas. She was planning something else. Something that required me to disappear quietly, wrapped in the excuse of care and concern. That night, I walked through the house touching everything, the framed photos, the curtains I'd sewn, the chair where my husband used to read. I whispered to the walls, "They're trying to take everything from me." And in that stillness, I swear I could almost hear my husband's voice. "Be careful. Don't show your cards too soon." He always knew how to read people. I should have listened more closely to that instinct he left behind. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I smiled when I saw them, pretended not to know a thing. My daughter-in-law greeted me with fake sweetness, her perfume too strong, her words too soft. I nodded, played along. If they wanted a performance, I'd give them one until I figured out what exactly they were trying to do. But every sound in the house started to feel suspicious. Every whisper between them carried hidden meaning. When she picked up the phone in the next room, I'd turn off the TV just to catch a word or two. When my son avoided eye contact, I saw guilt written across his face like a confession he couldn't say aloud. They were preparing something, and I was the last to know. That night, before going to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. The phrase social worker kept echoing in my mind. People only call those when someone is old, unstable, or in the way. I realized then they weren't planning a Christmas celebration. They were planning my removal. And the most terrifying part was that they almost made me believe it was for my own good. It was early morning when I heard the knock on my door. 3 firm taps, not friendly, not hesitant, just official. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a young woman stood there, holding a clipboard and wearing a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson. I'm from Adult Protective Services. Just here for a quick wellness check." For a moment, I couldn't even find my voice. "A what?" I asked, gripping the doorframe. She repeated it, slower this time, as if speaking to someone fragile. "A wellness check." My mind raced back to that overheard phone call. The whispers about an evaluation, about handling things before Christmas. My stomach sank. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had called them. Someone close. I let her in, trying to steady my breathing. She looked around the house, eyes scanning every corner. The photos, the medication bottles by the counter, even the mail on the table. "Do you live alone, Mrs. Lawson?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. "By choice." Her pen paused mid-note, and I could almost see her thoughts forming. Defensive, possibly unstable. It's strange how being independent can suddenly be turned into suspicion. She began asking more questions about my memory, my finances, my daily routine. I answered calmly, but my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly. "Do you ever forget to eat or bathe?" she asked. "Only when people forget to invite me," I said with a half-smile. Humor, my last defense against humiliation. She chuckled politely, but the way she glanced around made me feel like a stranger in my own home. At one point, she asked if she could check the kitchen. "Of course," I said, even though the request stung. I followed her as she opened cupboards, peeked inside the fridge, scribbled notes. The refrigerator hummed loudly, like it too was uncomfortable. She nodded toward the framed photo on the counter, my son, his wife, and me from years ago. "They look like such a loving family," she said softly. I almost laughed. Yes, appearances are powerful things. When she finally finished, she gave me a pamphlet about assisted living. "Just so you have options," she said. I took it with both hands, the paper shaking ever so slightly. Assisted living. That was their plan. To make it seem like I couldn't manage, that I needed help. I thanked her for her time, closed the door gently, and the moment the latch clicked, the tears I'd held back came rushing down. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that pamphlet. The smiling faces on the cover looked nothing like help. They looked like cages wrapped in good intentions.
My son must have signed something.
Or maybe she did it without him knowing. No, he knew. He must have. My heart broke not just for the betrayal, but for how carefully it was disguised as care. That evening, I found myself pacing the house, every creak in the floorboards echoing louder than usual. I couldn't shake the image of that young woman taking notes about my life, my habits, my home, my sanity. I felt exposed, like every part of my existence had been reduced to checkboxes on her clipboard. Independent, but vulnerable. Aging, but coherent. I could almost see the report already written. Before bed, I tore the pamphlet in half and threw it into the trash. They won't take me away, I whispered to the empty room. My husband's picture seemed to watch me from the mantel, his eyes steady, kind. Not yet, I murmured back to him. They think they're saving me from myself. But soon, they'll learn I'm the only one who knows exactly what's going on. The following days passed in a blur of anxiety and forced calm. I went through my routine like a ghost wandering her own house, tidying up, watering plants, pretending nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew something was brewing beneath the surface. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped. Every shadow by the window felt like another visit waiting to happen. And then one afternoon, curiosity, or maybe survival, pushed me toward the truth. I was dusting my late husband's old desk when I noticed a small envelope tucked behind a stack of papers. It wasn't there before, at least, not the last time I'd cleaned. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photocopies of legal documents. My name was printed across the top, followed by cold, clinical words, evaluation request for cognitive decline. I felt my chest tighten. It was real. They had filed something against me. My knees nearly gave out, but I steadied myself against the chair. The next page was worse, an authorization form for temporary guardianship, signed by my son's wife. My daughter-in-law. My mind spun. Guardianship? That meant control over my home, my finances, my life. The final signature line was blank, but the space for my son's name was there, waiting. Waiting for the final betrayal. I sank into the chair, papers shaking in my hands. For a long time, I just stared at them, unable to cry. The pain was too sharp for tears. It sat heavy in my throat, refusing to move. I thought of my husband, how he used to say, "Family is trust." He believed it so deeply that he never locked his drawers, never hid his will. Now, that trust was being weaponized against me by the very people he'd once welcomed into our home. When I finally did cry, it wasn't soft, it was guttural, the kind of sob that comes from years of swallowing pride. My tears fell on the ink, smudging the words until they blurred into black stains. Maybe that was fitting, truth turning into something ugly, something I could no longer read without feeling my heart split open. After a while, I composed myself. I reread every line, every date, every signature. One detail stood out, the name of the lawyer handling the case. It wasn't a stranger's name. It was his lawyer. The same one who had managed my husband's estate years ago. My chest filled with both fury and dread. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were using his legacy, his trust, to do it. I looked around the house, suddenly seeing it differently. Every photo frame, every corner, every memory felt tainted. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was evidence in their case against me. I imagined them whispering behind closed doors, saying things like, "She's not well. She forgets things. It's for her own safety." Lies dressed as concern. Betrayal disguised as care. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat in silence, holding those papers under the soft glow of the kitchen lamp. Outside, the world was moving on. Carolers singing down the street, laughter spilling from neighbors' windows. Christmas was coming for everyone else, but not for me. For me, It had turned into a countdown. Not to joy, but to exile. As I folded the documents and slipped them back into the envelope, I made a silent promise. They won't win. Not like this. Not by pretending to love me while plotting my disappearance. My heart was broken, yes, but behind the heartbreak, something stronger began to stir. Resolve. And as I blew out the candle that night, I whispered to the darkness, if they want to take my freedom, they'll have to face the truth first. The next morning, I woke up with the papers still beside me on the table, wrinkled, stained with dried tears. The sun slipped weakly through the curtains, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt alert. Betrayal has a way of burning away illusions, leaving only clarity behind. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one, but on my terms. I needed help, someone I could trust completely. Someone who hadn't forgotten who I really was. My first thought was of Mr. Anderson, my late husband's old lawyer. He had handled everything when Michael passed away, from the will to the estate papers. He was discreet, loyal, and most importantly, he owed me nothing but honesty. I rummaged through the drawers until I found his card, edges yellowed from age. My hands trembled as I dialed the number, but when his familiar voice answered, a small sense of relief washed over me. Mr. Anderson, I whispered, I think I need your help. We agreed to speak in person. I didn't want to risk my phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was listening. But even as I made the plan, a part of me knew I had to be cautious. If my daughter-in-law suspected I was onto them, she would move faster. So I decided to write him a letter first. Old-fashioned, personal, impossible to trace. I poured everything onto those pages. The phone call I overheard, the visit from the social worker, the forged documents. My handwriting wavered, but my words didn't. Please keep this confidential, I wrote at the end. If I'm right, they'll try to act before Christmas. And when they do, I need someone who can stand between me and them. I sealed the letter with shaking hands, slipped it into an envelope, and walked to the postbox just before dawn. The world was still asleep, and the air bit at my skin, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. I was no longer just a victim waiting for the next blow. When I returned home, the house felt eerily quiet. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the floor, the hum of the heater, the faint ticking of the clock. I made myself tea and tried to calm my thoughts, but my eyes kept wandering to the window. What if they already knew? What if the lawyer called them first? Trust had become a fragile thing, even with people I once believed were on my side. That night, I barely slept. Every time the wind brushed against the shutters, I thought it was someone at the door. I lay awake, rehearsing what I'd say if they confronted me, how I'd pretend to be confused, harmless, unaware. It's a cruel thing to have to perform weakness just to protect your strength. But in a world that treats old age as fragility, sometimes pretending to be frail is the only armor you have left. I started noticing small details. Papers moved on my desk, drawers slightly ajar. She was snooping, searching for something to use against me. I made sure to leave innocent distractions, old recipes, unpaid bills, anything that could confirm her suspicions without giving her what she really wanted. Every move became deliberate. Every gesture, a trap of my own. Then one evening, my son arrived alone. He looked tired, older somehow. "Mom," he began softly, "Sarah's worried about you. Maybe it's time you let us help." His voice cracked on that last word, help. I wanted to reach for him, to shake him, to remind him that I'd been helping him since the day he was born. But instead I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I do need a little help." His shoulders relaxed, relief washing over his face. He thought he'd won. After he left, I sat in silence, letting the words replay in my mind. Maybe I do need a little help. They thought that meant surrender. But what I meant was different. I needed help to reveal the truth, to protect what was mine, to show them that underestimating me was their biggest mistake. That night, I called Mr. Anderson and whispered, "They're ready to make their move. It's almost time." He didn't ask how I knew. He simply said, "Then be ready, Margaret.
Stay calm.
When they think you're at your weakest, that's when you strike."
And I will.
I promised myself as I turned off the lights. I'll play the fool for now. But when the curtain rises on Christmas Day, the truth will take center stage. It came on a Tuesday evening, wrapped in false cheer and the smell of deceit. My daughter-in-law arrived unannounced, a forced smile plastered on her face and a red envelope in hand. "We wanted you to feel included," she said sweetly, her tone dripping with insincerity. I could almost hear the rehearsed lines spinning behind her eyes. I invited her in, though every instinct told me to keep the door closed. She sat across from me, crossing her legs carefully, the way people do when they want to seem polite but in control. "We're hosting a special lunch this year," she said. "Just family, very intimate. We thought it would be nice to have you there." I smiled faintly, pretending to be touched. "Oh, how thoughtful," I murmured. Inside, my stomach churned. I knew this wasn't an invitation, it was a setup. She began to outline the details, the time, the dress code, the little surprise they had planned afterward. Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a hunter who believes the trap is set perfectly. "We'll pick you up ourselves," she added. "It'll just be easier that way." Easier for whom, I wondered. Easier to make sure I didn't escape? Easier to deliver me where they wanted me to go, that place they called care, but I called imprisonment. I kept my expression soft, almost confused. "Oh, that sounds lovely," I said, clasping my hands. "I'll wear my green sweater. Michael always said it brought out my eyes." She smiled wider, but her eyes flickered. That small hesitation told me everything. She hadn't expected me to accept so easily. She wanted resistance, fear, something to confirm the story she'd been weaving. But I gave her nothing but quiet compliance. After she left, I placed the invitation on the table and stared at it for a long time. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was my son's. His familiar loops and curves, his careful letters. That detail, so small, yet so painful, nearly broke me. He had gone along with it. Whatever this plan was, he was part of it now. My own flesh and blood, carrying me to the slaughter with a smile. I walked to my husband's portrait and whispered, "They think I don't see, but I see everything." His photograph caught a slant of lamplight, and for a moment, it felt like he was there beside me, silent but resolute. I knew what he would have said. "Play along, Margaret. Let them underestimate you. Then end it on your terms." The next day, I began preparing, not for Christmas, but for confrontation. I ironed my clothes, baked cookies, even wrapped a few meaningless gifts just to complete the illusion. If they wanted a spectacle, I would give them one they would never forget. I called Mr. Anderson to confirm our plan. "They'll take me out that morning," I told him. "Be ready before noon." His voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. "Everything will be in place," he said. As the days passed, I kept up my act. When they called to check on me, I thanked them sweetly. When they dropped by, I acted forgetful, docile. But inside, every breath was sharpened with purpose. Each word they spoke became another piece of evidence, another step toward their downfall. They thought they were orchestrating my exit. In truth, I was quietly composing theirs. On Christmas Eve, I laid out my outfit neatly, the green sweater, my pearl earrings, my late husband's watch. I looked at myself in the mirror and almost laughed at the irony. They thought they were dressing me for surrender, but what I saw was preparation for victory. I smiled at my reflection, whispering, "Tomorrow, they'll learn who I really am." Christmas morning arrived with a brittle kind of quiet, the kind that feels rehearsed, like the calm before a performance everyone secretly dreads. I woke early, dressed carefully, and sat by the window waiting. The world outside sparkled with frost, but inside me there was only fire. When their car finally pulled up, I felt my pulse slow, not from fear, but focus. I told myself, this isn't the end. This is the scene before the truth unfolds. My son stepped out first, wearing his best coat, face pale, almost guilty. My daughter-in-law followed, radiant in red, her smile tight as ribbon. "Merry Christmas," she said brightly. I greeted them with a gentle nod and let them take my arm. "You look lovely, Mom," my son murmured, avoiding my eyes. Thank you, dear, I said softly. I wanted to look my best. Inside, I was trembling, not from weakness, but from holding back every emotion that wanted to spill. The car smelled of pine and perfume, artificial cheer layered over something sour. She drove, of course. He sat beside her, silent, fiddling with the air vent. I was in the back seat, watching the reflection of their faces in the rearview mirror. You'll love the place, she said. It's peaceful, full of people your age. You'll finally get some rest. Her words hung in the air like poison disguised as kindness. I smiled faintly. Rest sounds wonderful, I whispered. The roads stretched endlessly, lined with bare trees and patches of snow. My hands rested quietly on my lap, clutching the small cross my husband once wore. I turned it between my fingers, praying not for salvation, but for patience. Every mile brought me closer to their trap, and closer to the moment it would collapse. I could feel it, like a storm brewing just beyond the clouds. My son kept glancing back at me, as if torn between guilt and duty. Mom, are you okay? He asked halfway through the drive. Of course, dear, I replied, forcing a tender smile. Why wouldn't I be? His lips parted, but no words came. For a split second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to hold my hand during storms, who once promised never to leave me behind. Then he looked away, and that boy was gone. When the car turned off the main road, the landscape grew unfamiliar. No holiday decorations, no laughter, just gray buildings and empty fields. Are we still heading to lunch? I asked softly. My daughter-in-law hesitated, her grip tightening on the wheel. Just a quick stop first, she said. Some paperwork to finalize. Paperwork. The word sliced through the air, like a blade. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. I leaned back and looked out the window, pretending not to notice the gates in the distance. Tall, metal, cold. A sign appeared briefly as we passed. Silver Pines Care Residence. My throat closed. There it was. Their perfect little plan, neatly packaged as compassion. I turned my eyes to the horizon, pretending to admire the sky. It's beautiful out here, I said softly. She nodded, satisfied, unaware that I could see the reflection of my lawyer's car parked discreetly across the street. The closer we got, the quieter the car became. Even the Christmas music on the radio seemed too cheerful for the moment. My son rubbed his palms against his knees, a nervous tic from childhood. I almost pitied him, almost. Because love doesn't excuse betrayal, it only makes it harder to forget. Everything's going to be fine, he whispered, more to himself than to me. As the gates opened, a shiver ran down my spine. The air seemed thicker, heavier. My daughter-in-law straightened her coat, her eyes gleaming with victory. Here we are, she said. I smiled sweetly, my voice calm as ever. Yes, I murmured. Here we are. She had no idea that the game she thought she was winning was about to end, and not in her favor. The car rolled to a stop in front of the tall iron gates, the kind that don't just keep people safe, they keep them in. My daughter-in-law parked neatly, her movements precise, confident, like someone signing the last line of a carefully written lie. I could see two men waiting near the entrance, clipboards in hand, dressed too formally for Christmas Day. My pulse slowed, and I took a deep breath. This is it, I thought. The moment they think they've won. She turned to me, that rehearsed smile still pinned to her face. We're just going to get you checked in, okay? She said sweetly, as if explaining a field trip to a child. They'll take great care of you here. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Checked in? I thought we were going to lunch. Her expression faltered for half a second before she caught herself. Oh, yes, but first, just a little formality. Formality. That word would haunt her soon enough. My son stepped out and opened my door, avoiding my gaze. His hands were shaking, though he tried to hide it. I held onto his arm as I stepped out, my movements slow and deliberate. You're such a good son, I said softly, and for a moment, guilt flickered in his eyes like a candle struggling to stay lit. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But pity has no place when truth is about to surface. We walked toward the entrance. The men with the clipboards approached, their smiles professional. Empty. Mrs. Lawson? One of them asked. Yes, I replied, steady as stone. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law laughed nervously. Oh, she gets a little mixed up sometimes, she said quickly. You'll see. Her voice was full of false charm, but her fingers were tapping rapidly against her coat, a tell she didn't even realize she had. Just as she began reaching into her bag for the papers, another car pulled up behind us, sleek, dark, familiar. My heart steadied. The door opened, and out stepped Mr. Anderson, his overcoat catching the wind, briefcase in hand. The color drained from her face. What's going on? She hissed, her tone slipping. Who is that? I smiled faintly. Oh, I said calmly, just an old friend of my husband's. Mr. Anderson approached with measured steps, his voice calm but commanding. Merry Christmas, he greeted. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. My son looked bewildered. Mr. Anderson? What are you doing here? Protecting what's mine to protect, he said, handing one of the men a thick envelope. Before any signatures are made, I think you'll want to review this. His tone carried authority, the kind that silences entire rooms. The men began reading through the papers, their brows furrowing almost immediately. My daughter-in-law's breathing quickened. What is this? She demanded. This, Mr. Anderson said evenly, is proof that Mrs. Lawson remains the sole legal owner of all family assets, and that any attempt to alter or transfer them without her consent constitutes fraud. The word fraud hit the air like thunder. For the first time, my son looked at his wife, truly looked at her. Sarah, what is he talking about? He asked, his voice trembling. You told me this was about her health. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the men with the clipboards took a step back, sensing the shift. I stood quietly through it all, my hands folded in front of me, my voice steady. You see, I said softly, sometimes the ones they call confused are simply the ones who see the clearest. She turned toward me, pale, her lips parting in disbelief. And in that moment, I realized the tables had turned completely. The trap she set for me had become the one she couldn't escape. For a few seconds, time seemed to stop. The cold December wind carried the faint sound of carolers in the distance, singing words about peace and forgiveness, words that felt painfully ironic. My daughter-in-law stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like someone gasping for air. The two men from the facility exchanged glances, clearly realizing they had walked into something far beyond their pay grade. My son, pale and trembling, looked from her to me, as if seeing both of us for the first time. Mr. Anderson adjusted his glasses and began speaking with quiet authority. This is the amended version of your late husband's will, Mr. Lawson, he explained, handing my son a copy. Filed 2 years before his passing. It clearly states that all property, financial accounts, and family holdings remain under Margaret's sole control until her death. No transfer, sale, or reassignment can occur without her explicit signature, witnessed by legal counsel. His calm voice sliced through the chaos like a blade through ice. My son's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. But, Sarah said. He stopped, unable to finish. I watched the realization sink in, the weight of truth pressing down on him. She said you couldn't manage things anymore, he whispered. That it was for your safety. I took a slow breath and met his eyes. Safety, dear, is a strange word when used by those who benefit most from your disappearance. Sarah's voice cracked. I did it for all of us. She's not well. She forgets things Enough, Mr. Anderson interrupted sharply. You forged documents. You filed false claims. You attempted to declare this woman unfit without due cause. He handed one of the officials a second folder. Everything is here, the emails, the forms, even the altered dates. I'd advise you to read them carefully before proceeding with any admission. The men glanced at each other, clearly alarmed. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not guilt, fear. The kind of fear born when control slips through your fingers and the truth comes crashing down. You can't prove anything, she muttered, her voice trembling. Mr. Anderson gave a small, humorless smile. On the contrary, he said softly, we already have. He nodded toward his car, where another associate stepped out holding a sealed envelope. The court will receive this before the day is over. My son ran a hand through his hair, his composure unraveling. Sarah, how could you? He whispered. She turned to him, desperate now. You don't understand. I was protecting our future. She doesn't need this house. She doesn't need. I stood then, my voice calm but cutting. I needed nothing, Sarah, except honesty. And you couldn't give me that. The words landed heavier than I expected, not out of anger, but sorrow. The officials cleared their throats and stepped back, one of them quietly saying, we'll need to verify all this before moving forward. My daughter-in-law tried to protest, but no one was listening anymore. My son buried his face in his hands, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small or helpless. I felt seen, vindicated, whole. I turned to Mr. Anderson, my voice low but steady. Thank you, I said. He gave a nod. You did the hard part, Margaret. You trusted your instincts. I looked at Sarah, the woman I had welcomed like a daughter, and for a fleeting moment, I saw what she could have been if greed hadn't poisoned her heart. But some lessons only come through consequence. As we stood there in the cold, surrounded by the remnants of deceit, I realized something profound. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of papers, witnesses, and a calm woman who refuses to be erased. And that morning, as the Christmas bells began to ring from a nearby church, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had haunted me for weeks finally broke. He stood there for a long time, his breath visible in the cold air, his eyes hollow, as if the truth had stripped him bare. My son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the man I had trusted with my heart, was now standing in the wreckage of his wife's lies. I watched him try to make sense of everything, the papers trembling in his hands, his voice breaking as he whispered, Mom, I didn't know. His words came out like a confession and a plea all at once. I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But after everything, the whispers, the silence, the betrayal, belief felt like a fragile thing I no longer knew how to hold. You didn't want to know, I said softly. He flinched, as though I'd struck him. You saw me disappearing and thought it was easier to look away. His lips parted, but no sound came. The truth had already spoken louder than he ever could. He sank onto the hood of the car, head in his hands. The air between us felt heavy, dense with years of unspoken words. She told me you were forgetting things, he murmured. That you left the stove on, that you mixed up your pills. I didn't want to think she'd lie about that. His voice cracked again, thinner this time. I thought she was helping. I closed my eyes. That's how manipulation works, dear. It doesn't ask for your trust. It borrows your love to build its own alibi. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of distant bells echoed from the nearby church, filling the silence with something both beautiful and cruel. I could see the boy he used to be in the way he rubbed his palms together, just like he did when he was nervous before his first school play. I wanted to reach for him, but something inside me held back. Love can forgive, yes, but it also remembers. Finally, he lifted his head, eyes red and swollen. I'll fix this, he said, determination cutting through the despair. I'll make it right, Mom. I shook my head gently. You can't undo betrayal with promises, Michael. Trust isn't repaired with words, it's rebuilt through truth. He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. I'll earn it back, he whispered, even if it takes the rest of my life. I studied his face, the man and the child intertwined in his expression. Then start, I said quietly. Start by seeing me as I am, not as she painted me. His gaze met mine, and for the first time in months I saw clarity there. The fog had lifted. He finally saw what I had been trying to show him all along, not weakness, but strength. Not madness, but awareness. He turned to Sarah, who stood by the gate trembling, her mask of confidence shattered. You used me, he said in a voice I barely recognized. You made me doubt my own mother. She tried to grab his arm, but he stepped back. I loved you, Sarah, he said, his tone breaking, but I won't spend another day building a life on your lies. She froze, eyes wide with disbelief, as if she'd just watched her carefully built world crumble. I looked at him then, my son, my boy, and for a fleeting moment, pride swelled in my chest. Not because he was defending me, but because he was finally defending himself. He was no longer the man trapped between love and fear. He had chosen truth, however painful it was. When we finally left that place, the air outside felt lighter. The frost on the car windows glittered under the winter sun, and as he opened the door for me, I touched his hand gently. "It's not too late," I said softly. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I know, Mom. I know." Word travels fast in small towns, faster still when scandal wears pearls and perfume. By the next day, whispers about the Christmas scene at Silver Pines were already spreading. But what mattered most wasn't what they said.
It was what they saw.
Because that morning, as my daughter-in-law's lies unraveled in front of witnesses, her mask didn't just crack, it shattered. And there was no graceful way to hide the mess left behind. When the officials from the care facility realized the legal trap they'd almost walked into, their tone changed completely. "Mrs. Lawson, we are deeply sorry," one of them said, flustered. "We were misled." I nodded graciously, keeping my composure. "I know," I replied calmly. Manipulators often sound more convincing than the truth. I watched Sarah standing beside me, her face pale, her perfect hair slightly out of place, and for once, she had nothing clever left to say. The head administrator stepped outside to make a phone call, probably to confirm the validity of the documents Mr. Anderson had presented. Within minutes, a small crowd of staff had gathered by the entrance, their curious eyes flicking from Sarah to me. The humiliation was written all over her face. "You can all stop staring," she snapped, voice sharp and trembling. "This is just a misunderstanding." But no one moved. The silence around her was louder than any accusation could have been. My son stood nearby, silent, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He didn't need to speak. His distance said everything. Sarah tried to turn toward him, desperation seeping into her voice. "Michael, please, you know I only wanted—" "Stop," he said firmly. "You wanted control. You wanted her house, her money, her peace. You didn't want family. You wanted ownership." Each word landed like a hammer, echoing through the stunned air. She looked around wildly, realizing she had lost not just the plan, but the audience too. The social worker who had visited me earlier that month appeared at the door, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Lawson," she said gently, "if I had known—" I cut her off with a faint smile. "It's all right, dear. You were just doing your job. I just wish others were as honest about theirs." The woman lowered her head, shame flashing across her face. Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You're all making a mistake," she shouted. "She's manipulating you. She's—" Her voice broke as Mr. Anderson calmly placed one last document in her trembling hands. "That," he said, "is a restraining order pending review for forgery, coercion, and attempted fraud." Her knees buckled slightly, and for a brief moment, I saw the raw panic behind her arrogance. The kind of fear that no amount of lies could disguise. No one laughed. No one gloated. Even the staff, once curious spectators, looked away out of pity. My son gently touched my shoulder and whispered, "Let's go home, Mom." I nodded, but before leaving, I turned to Sarah one last time. "You tried to cage me with your lies," I said quietly, "but it's you who ended up trapped inside them." She didn't respond, she couldn't. Her eyes were hollow, her pride bleeding out through silence. As we walked away, I could still hear the faint echo of her voice calling my son's name, begging him to stop. But he didn't. He never looked back. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Humiliation doesn't come from being exposed. It comes from being seen exactly as you are when you've spent years pretending otherwise. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean, like the world had finally exhaled. Mr. Anderson walked beside me, his expression soft. "It's over," he said. I shook my head gently. "No," I murmured. It's only over for her. For me, it's a beginning, the first Christmas in years I'll spend in peace. And as we drove away, the gates behind us closed with a metallic clang, not trapping me this time, but sealing her fate. That evening, after everything had unraveled, I returned home to a silence that felt different. Not heavy, not lonely, but earned. The house, once filled with tension and suspicion, now felt like it could breathe again. I lit the candles on the dining table, the same ones my husband and I used to light every Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years, their glow felt warm instead of mournful. I wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. I wasn't hoping for forgiveness or explanations. I was simply at peace. My son came by later, quietly, carrying a pie, the same kind I used to bake for him as a boy. "Thought you might like some company," he said softly. I looked at him, and for a moment, words failed me. The guilt still lingered in his eyes, but behind it was something new: humility.
Growth.
He wasn't the man who had sat silently by while I was nearly stripped of everything. He was learning to be my son again, one step at a time. We set the table together. No grand decorations, no endless chatter, just the soft clinking of plates and the quiet comfort of presence. He poured tea, I served the pie, and we ate in silence, both of us trying to fill the empty spaces that years of lies had carved. After a while, he broke the quiet. "I don't deserve to be here," he whispered. I smiled gently. "No one deserves forgiveness," I said. "They earn it, little by little, one honest act at a time." Outside, snow had started to fall. I watched through the window as the flakes gathered on the branches, soft and patient. "Do you think she'll ever change?" he asked, not looking up. I took a deep breath, thinking carefully. "Maybe," I said. "But some people mistake love for possession. Until she learns the difference, she'll never find peace." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. We toasted with teacups, clumsy and sincere. There was no music, no crowd, no gifts, yet it was the most meaningful Christmas dinner I'd ever had. We talked about my husband, about old traditions, about how small things, a candle, a laugh, a recipe, could carry the weight of memory. It wasn't a celebration of victory. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the truth, once revealed, doesn't need noise to be felt. Later that night, when my son left, he hugged me tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. I held him close, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. "You gave me back my strength," he said. I smiled through tears. "No, dear," I replied softly. "You just finally remembered your own." And with that, he walked out into the snow, leaving footprints that glowed faintly under the streetlight, small, fleeting signs of redemption. I stayed awake long after he left, sitting by the fire, the house wrapped in stillness. The clock ticked, the wood crackled, and I thought about how strange it was. The same walls that once felt like a prison now felt like protection. Every shadow, every scar had a story, and mine was no longer one of loss. It was one of survival. I poured myself a final cup of tea and raised it toward the empty chair across from me. "Merry Christmas, my love," I whispered to my husband's memory. "You'd be proud of how it ended." For a moment, I swore I could almost feel him there, not as a ghost, but as warmth, as peace. The kind of presence that doesn't need words to be understood. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing footprints, softening edges. The world was quiet again, but not empty. I smiled, knowing that sometimes solitude isn't loneliness, it's freedom wearing a softer face. And this year, freedom was the only guest I needed at my table. The next morning, the snow had settled like a white blanket over everything, soft, silent, almost forgiving. But not everything deserved forgiveness. And certainly not everyone. I woke early, knowing there was one last thing I needed to do before closing this chapter. A loose end. A truth that needed to be spoken not out of cruelty, but clarity. So I wrapped myself in my warmest coat, took a deep breath, and walked the familiar path to my son's house. When I arrived, she was there, my daughter-in-law, sitting on the porch steps with red-rimmed eyes, her hair messy, her arrogance finally stripped away. She stood quickly when she saw me, her breath catching in the cold air. Mrs. Lawson, but I raised a hand gently, stopping her. I'm not here to argue, I said softly. Not today. She swallowed hard, nodding like a chastened child. I could see the fear in her eyes, not fear of punishment, but fear of truth. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Two women bound by love for the same man, divided by choices that had nearly destroyed us both. You know, I began slowly, there was a time I prayed we would be close, like mother and daughter. I welcomed you into my home, my life, my heart. Her eyes lowered, shame pressing her shoulders down. I know, she whispered. I ruined everything. I shook my head.
No.
You revealed everything. She blinked, confused. I stepped closer, my tone calm, steady. People don't become villains overnight. They show you who they are in small ways, a lie here, a manipulation there. And when we ignore those signs, thinking love will fix it, we hand them the scissors they later use to cut us apart. Her breath hitched, but she didn't interrupt. I took a slow breath, the cold air biting at my lungs. You tried to put me in a place where people are forgotten, I said quietly. A place where voices go unheard. But before you did that, you forgot something important. She looked up, eyes wide. I held her gaze. Whoever tries to imprison others eventually locks themselves in their own lies. The words hung between us like frost on the wind. She opened her mouth, but no apology came. Maybe none existed strong enough to rebuild what she destroyed. My voice softened, but it did not waver. I don't hate you, but I won't let you near me again. My home, my peace, my life, you're no longer part of them. A tear escaped down her cheek, and for a brief moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. My son stepped out quietly, as if he'd been listening from the doorway. He stood behind me, silent but resolute. She looked at him with pleading eyes, but he didn't move toward her.
Not this time.
I'm sorry, she whispered, though even she seemed unsure who the apology was for. I nodded once. I know, I said simply. But knowing wasn't the same as trusting. Or forgetting. I turned to leave, and my son touched my arm gently. Mom, that was brave, he murmured. No, I replied, looking back one last time at the woman who had nearly stolen my future. That was necessary. He nodded, and I could see the understanding settle in his features, the kind of understanding that only arrives after truth tears down the last of the illusions. As we walked away, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because she was gone, but because I had reclaimed my voice, a voice she tried to silence. The snow crunched softly beneath my boots, each step a reminder that sometimes the hardest lessons are not for ourselves, but for those who try to break us. And sometimes, those lessons echo louder than any punishment ever could. I didn't look back. Some chapters are meant to remain closed. And this one at last was sealed. That night, after everything finally settled, I sat alone in my living room with nothing but the soft glow of the Christmas tree to keep me company. But for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt clean. Honest. Like the house had finally exhaled, releasing months of tension from its old wooden bones. I ran my hand along the arm of my husband's favorite chair and whispered, "We made it, love." Not out of victory, but relief. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt liberated. There's a difference. Triumph is loud, glittering, demanding applause. But liberation? Liberation is quiet. It arrives gently, like snowfall, soft, steady, covering the wounds until they no longer sting. I breathed in the scent of pine, and with each breath, I felt more like myself again. Not the fragile woman they tried to paint me as. Not the burden they wanted to store away. But the woman I have always been. Aware, resilient, unshakable. I walked to the window and watched the snow fall under the streetlights. Each flake twirled freely, following its own path. Freedom, I whispered, is choosing your own direction. And that night I realized I had done just that. By standing firm, by trusting my instincts, By refusing to let fear make decisions for me, I had given myself the greatest Christmas gift of all, the gift of reclaiming my own story. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from my son. Mom, I love you. Thank you for not giving up on me. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the words settle deep. Love isn't perfect. It falters, it wounds, it forgets. But sometimes, if we're lucky, it finds its way back home. I typed a simple reply. I love you too, dear. We'll rebuild this, one step at a time. Not a promise of easy forgiveness, but of honest beginnings. When I finally sat down to eat the tiny Christmas dinner I'd prepared for myself, I lit a single candle. Not for tradition, not for nostalgia, but for gratitude. Gratitude for the truth that surfaced, even when it hurt. Gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had. Gratitude for the silence that no longer felt like abandonment, but peace. I raised my glass to the empty chair across from me. To freedom, I said softly. To choosing who sits at my table. As the night deepened, I wrapped myself in a blanket and let the flames of the fireplace warm my feet. I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. I realized then that solitude isn't a punishment, not when it comes with dignity, not when it comes with truth. Sometimes, the best company you can have is the woman you became after surviving what was meant to break you. Eventually, I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at my reflection, the wrinkles, the silver hair, the tired but steady eyes. And for the first time in months, I truly recognized myself. Not the victim of a cruel scheme, not the fragile old woman they tried to dismiss, but the woman who stood up to betrayal and won. Quietly, elegantly, completely. Before going to bed, I turned off all the lights except the tree. Its soft glow filled the house with something new, not sadness, not fear, not expectation.
But peace. Pure, solid peace.
I whispered one last thing into the night, letting the words drift upward like smoke. Sometimes, the greatest gift is realizing who doesn't deserve a seat at your table. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers to my chin, and closed my eyes with a smile. I was free, truly free, and no one would ever take that from me again. When I look back on everything that happened, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. A clarity that only comes when life forces you to see people exactly as they are, without masks, without excuses, without illusions. I learned that betrayal doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with small silences, with averted glances, with doors that were once open and suddenly begin to close. And perhaps you know this feeling. Perhaps you, too, have felt someone pushing you out of your own story while smiling as if they were doing you a favor. But here's something nobody tells you. It's not loneliness that hurts, it's being surrounded by people who prefer to see you weak. The truth, sometimes, losing people who stab you in the back is painful. It's the greatest protection life can give you. And now I want to ask you, with an open heart, who in your life is trying to belittle you? Who is treating you like a problem when you've always been the solution? And for how long are you going to allow this? Because in the end, you deserve to sit at the table with those who honor your history, be with someone who respects you, those who truly see you. And if this story moved you, made you think, reflect, or even reminded you of someone, don't leave here without doing your part. Enjoy the video. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications.